by the effects of this trade policy between Canada and the U.S.
Yes, exactly. And he makes that very clear, and he's quite vocal about his concerns. And sort of his response has been to take this fight directly to Americans.
The Premier of Ontario is joining us right now. Premier, thank you so much for joining us.
He's appeared on U.S. networks like CNN and Fox, for example.
So these tariffs is nothing but a tax on Americans. President Trump calls it Liberation Day. I call it Termination Day because a lot of people are going to be terminated from their jobs.
Talking directly to an American audience, saying, hey, the tariffs are bad for you too.
If you go after Canada, we have no choice but retaliate. And I apologize to the American people.
He's been visibly defiant, wearing Canada's not for sale hats.
We will use every tool in our toolbox to fight back. We can't sit back and roll over.
I mean, he's pulled, U.S. liquor off Ontario shelves, kind of as punishment, really. He's sort of saying, if you don't want to do business with us, then we won't do business with you.
Depending on how far this goes, we will go to the extent of cutting off their energy.
And, another thing that he's done that hasn't materialized, but he's threatened, is withholding energy exports to the U.S.
That would be huge, though, I imagine. I remember living up in New England, and so much energy comes down from Canada, especially in the winter months.
Yes. His response and his sort of strategy is to, show the Americans how much they rely on Canada and that they, in his view, they should not be treating Canada this way. But, about a week ago, Doug Ford has sort of become a prominent figure in U.S. media, and it's all because of this ad that his government had bought and paid for to appear on U.S. television. Now, this advertisement, it's about 1 minute long. It shows clips of, blue-collar workers, families at home, farmers, and they're all sort of meant to represent American workers. And those establishing shots are overlaid by excerpts from an address on free trade that former U.S. President Ronald Reagan, who is a Republican, gave in 1987. And in that address, Reagan says, "Tariffs hurt every American." So the advertisement does splice the address. The address is originally 5 minutes long, but it does not alter or change Reagan's words in any way from that address many decades ago.
And I do want to point out that the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute issued a statement after the ad aired and said that it misrepresented the presidential radio address, and that the government of Ontario had not sought permission to edit those remarks. But what you're saying is those remarks were nonetheless comments that Ronald Reagan did say as president about tariffs.
Yes. Again, the advertisement does splice the words and sort of rearranges them a little bit, but he did say that tariffs hurt every American. Yes.
And that ad sent shockwaves here in Washington. How would you characterize the fallout to all of this?
Swift and immediate. These ads, it was a $75 million advertising campaign. I will say that President Trump, a few days after it was launched, didn't seem to have an issue with it. He was sort of speaking to reporters, and he even went as far to say that if he was Canada, he'd make the same advertisement too. But then the Ronald Reagan Foundation released its statement, and that's sort of when things really flipped.
They did a fake ad yesterday. They were caught. The Ronald Reagan Foundation was the one that caught him. And it was totally the opposite of what they said. So I don't like that. That's dirty pool. And you can't do that.
He called the advert fake, and he said he was so upset by it that all trade talks are terminated.
President Trump posting to Truth Social last night that he is terminating all deals with our neighbors to the north.
At the same time, all eyes are sort of on Doug Ford on how he would respond to the backlash. And eventually he comes out and he says,
let's bring up what we heard from Doug Ford just a short time ago, saying in a statement on X that in speaking with Prime Minister Carney, Ontario will pause its U.S. advertising campaign effective Monday so that trade talks can resume.
I am going to pause the ad campaign. He says that it had achieved its intended goal, which is to raise awareness about the impact of U.S. tariffs. And he says, I will pause it starting on Monday.
I have, quote, directed my team to keep putting our message in front of Americans over the weekend so that we can air our commercial during the first two World Series games.
It was still to run throughout the weekend. including during the Major League Baseball World Series games, which are being viewed by millions.
Mm-hmm.
And so then Donald Trump puts out another Truth Social, and he says that he had wanted, the Canadians to pull it immediately. They did not pull it down immediately. It played during the World Series.
Read it in part, Joey. It says, quote, "Because of their serious misrepresentation of the facts and hostile act, I'm increasing the tariff on Canada by 10% over and above what they are paying now."
And now he's saying that he would put another 10% tariff on Canada.
They've apologized, and they said, we're going to take the ad down. Well, they didn't, but they did it very late. They let it play for another 2 nights, and now they took that ad down.
I mean, one thing also we heard from President Trump is he seemed particularly miffed by the fact that he saw this ad as being an attempt to improperly influence an upcoming big U.S. Supreme Court case next week here that's going to look at the legality of tariffs. And he didn't like that at all. He saw this as being Canadian intervention in U.S. politics.
Right. That's really important context here, because there's something bigger at stake here, which is, the fact that the legality of these tariffs are going to be weighed. And I should underscore that, the Canadian side of it all has never commented on the Supreme Court case. And, Ontario has been running anti-tariff ad for some time. This is sort of just one of several ad campaigns that they had launched since the tariffs were implemented.
Nadine, it's the long-term impact on the U.S.-Canada relationship that really interests me, because regardless of what rate these tariffs are at, it feels like, listening to you, that Canadians feel very betrayed by the U.S. government. And ahead of our interview, I was doing some research in preparation, and there are 2 studies I want to tell you about that I thought were really, really interesting. One takes a look at Americans' views of Canadians and of Canada. And you look at polls like Gallup earlier this year, they found that 89% of Americans held a warm view of Canada. It's a while back, February, but still, Americans think quite fondly of Canadians. We think broadly of them as being very friendly, affable people. But a few months later, the Pew Research Center did a survey on Canadians, and it found that Canadian attitudes towards the United States are at a near low. Only about a third of Canadians had a favorable opinion of the United States, and that was down about 20 points over the last year. And to that point, we were speaking to a guy who makes kitchen cabinets in New Brunswick. He exports a whole bunch of them down through New England, and he was really frustrated by what he says are 25% tariffs now that he's facing. And he told us that Canadians are by nature very forgiving people, but he does have questions about how this may kind of change permanently, or at least for the long term, the relationship between these 2 countries.
I think it's tough to say. I do think that Canadians, I think that sense of betrayal has cut really deep. At home, it's really hard to escape the impact of these tariffs on Canada. The bulk of our trade is done with the U.S., and even talk of shifting that to other markets, that would take decades. People's lives are being impacted by this, and at the end of the day, that is going to be felt deeply more than anything.
Well, Nadine, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
That was Nadine Youssef, the BBC's senior Canada reporter. By the way, if you liked today's episode, you might also appreciate another one we did recently on the U.S.-China trade relationship. You can find that in your feeds from October 15th. Folks, that is it for today's episode of The Global Story. Thank you, as always, for listening, and we'll be back tomorrow.
Tomorrow at noon on The Source, San Antonio College celebrates 100 years of changing lives. For a century, SAC has opened doors to education and opportunity, helping generations build brighter futures. From workforce training to university pathways, San Antonio College has been a cornerstone of access and innovation in higher education. We look back at 100 years of progress and ahead to what the next century holds on The Source Thursday at noon on Texas Public Radio.
Wherever you are, at the gym, in the waiting room, or in line at the store, stay up to date with the TPR app, which lets you listen live or on demand to catch something you may have missed. The TPR app alerts you to breaking news, local stories, and episodes of your favorite shows. Download Texas Public Radio for free at Apple's App Store or the Google Play Store.
News and Views, KTPR Stanton, on the air at 89.9 FM and online at tpr.org. It's 12 o'clock.
Hello, welcome to Newsday on the BBC World Service with James Copnell and Priya Rai. Thank you very much for your company.
China's President Xi Jinping and the US President Donald Trump have held talks lasting nearly 2 hours. A significant moment given the economic and political tensions between the two global superpowers. What might it mean for both countries and the global economy?
In Sudan, there are mounting reports of mass killings perpetrated by the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces in the days since they seized control of the city of Al Fasher, including inside a hospital. We'll speak to the Sudanese Doctors Network.
After devastating large parts of Jamaica, Hurricane Melissa has hit Cuba. We'll speak to a man worried about both countries, a Cuban doctor now living in the Jamaican capital, Kingston.
And we will also examine a deadly police operation against drug gangs in Brazil. That's after the latest world news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Shay Stevens. President Trump has left South Korea after meeting with China's President Xi Jinping in Busan. No word yet on whether the two leaders reached agreement on any issues. Meanwhile, Trump has ordered the Pentagon to immediately resume nuclear weapons testing for the first time in over 30 years. The president says the tests would be equal to those carried out in China and Russia. President Trump says he's given South Korea permission to build a nuclear-powered submarine. The announcement follows Trump's meeting with Korean President Lee Jae-myung and the finalizing of their trade deal. More from NPR's Deepa Shivaram.
Trump posted on social media that Korea will be building the nuclear-powered submarine in the Philadelphia shipyards. On Wednesday, when Trump met with Lee asked the president to allow Korea to receive fuel for nuclear-propelled subs in order to better track North Korean and Chinese submarines. Trump said in his post that based on the trade deal South Korea agreed to and the investments they're making in the U.S., which totals up to $350 billion, he gave support for them to build the new submarine. The announcement comes as Trump is meeting with Chinese leader Xi Jinping in Korea, the last stop on his trip to Asia. Deepa Shivaram, NPR News, Gyeongju, Korea.
The Federal Reserve Board has lowered its benchmark interest rate by a 0.25 percentage point. Fed Chair Jerome Powell says the modest rate cut is based on existing data showing higher unemployment.
Although official employment data for September are delayed, available evidence suggests that both layoffs and hiring remain low, and that both households' perceptions of job availability and firms' perceptions of hiring difficulty continue to decline.
Powell says inflation has eased from 2022 highs but remains higher than the central bank's goal of 2%. Americans relying on federal food aid under the SNAP program are at risk of losing those benefits on Friday. That leaves individual states to try to find food assistance for low-income residents. Alex Cox of member station WRKF reports on Louisiana's effort to help SNAP recipients.
While already convened for a special session on redistricting, the Louisiana legislature passed a resolution that paved the way for SNAP recipients to receive funding from the state. But 53,000 of those who rely on the program probably won't get the benefits. Louisiana Health Secretary Bruce Greenstein says that's because they are prioritizing children, the elderly, and people with disabilities.
The intention is that we're not covering able-bodied adults. That's the direction that we're headed.
Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry says the people who won't qualify for the state-funded benefits should lean on food banks or pursue jobs highlighted on the state-run online job board. For